The first time I ever saw one of the guests that I'll have today on Bridges, he was a contestant on American Ninja Warrior. And when they interviewed him and his wife, they shared about the loss of their first child and how their faith sustained them. I'm so glad you'll get to meet them on Bridges today. We'll talk about how God continues to grow their faith and their family. Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. I'm especially excited for you to meet my guests today, Josh and Katie Butler. And Josh, it's good to have you on Bridges today.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Nice to meet you. And Katie, really nice to have you on today, too.
Thank you, Monica.
Now, Josh, as I said, and Katie, when I first saw you both, it was on American Ninja Warrior. I love to watch the show just because of such great feats of being athletic, but the inspirational stories are really what intrigues me. And Josh, you were on your interview, you and Katie were just sharing about your family and your faith. And so I'd like us to start with that. And you were sharing about the loss of your son, Dewey.
So I guess the starting point of our story started in May 2015 when our son was born. He was born underweight, and he had to be rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit. And later he was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that had never been documented before. No one had really ever seen it. And he lived all of his life in the hospital.
Yeah. And
we cared for him as best we could with the doctors and nurses by our side. And being that the condition had never been seen before, the doctors didn't have a good prognosis, or they couldn't tell us what the next day would bring. But we prayed a bunch, and we asked God for healing. And that healing did not come this side of heaven. Right. But we tried to do the best we could. And
you did, and you prayed, and lots of people prayed. And I'm so sorry for the loss. And as you said, doctors didn't know what to tell you because they hadn't seen this. Katie, did you know during the pregnancy that there might be a complication? Or
we entered the whole pregnancy world thinking, we want minimal medical intervention. We want to do a doula. We want to have a midwife. We don't want to do hospitals. And at our 20-week ultrasound, we found out that there were some indicators possibly, might suggest a genetic condition. And at the time, that indicator was club feet. And when I found out about club feet, I just bawled and bawled. I was so upset. And looking back now, that is so trivial.
Yeah.
That is something that can be fixed, not a big deal.
Right.
But at the time, that was the end of my world. And we had to follow up with weekly ultrasounds to check on our baby, to check on Dewey. At that time, we still didn't know if he was a boy or girl. We were wanting to keep it a surprise. And towards the end of the pregnancy, they did not want us to deliver just like a typical pregnancy. They wanted us to do a C-section because they wanted to be able to control everything in case Dewey became in distress. And he was in distress, so we did have to do a C-section. I'm so thankful that the doctors thought about that, even though they didn't know what his condition was. They had a hint, that it might be a difficult labor. And so after the C-section, and he was taken to the ICU, they still didn't know what was going on, and they were just following Dewey's lead. If Dewey's blood sugar was out of whack, he had, one of the many diagnoses. He had transient neonatal diabetes. I mean, it was just like these things were out of left field. What is going on?
Like, who's ever heard of that before?
Yeah, I mean, it's really rare. Yeah. And his condition, it's unbalanced translocation of chromosomes 6 and 10, and where it broke off on the P arm and the Q arm. I mean, I did not take science courses, in college.
Well, and even if you did, I don't think we would understand any of that.
So part of it is, I just had a major surgery. We just had our first child. Yeah. We can't go home because our child's here, and we have all this jargon that we are trying to learn as much as we possibly can. But the doctors are also, they're just guessing at things right now until they see what happens.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I look at the two of you, you're both so young, so attractive, you're Christians, you know. It's like, oh,
That's so sweet.
everyone thinks, you know, you have a baby and it's going to be, you know, it's just going to be wonderful. And then you get all this news and your whole world is just upside down. And I just remember, Josh, you know, when I watched you on American Ninja Warrior, I'm just thinking, he's such a great athlete and they have faith and they're going through all of this and it just had to be so much. And yet I have to believe that God just really grew your faith and strengthened you both.
Yeah, there were dark times.
Yeah.
There were times where we were right beside each other at the foot of our bed on our floor and just praying and just crying together. But yeah, like we talk about all the time, we had people praying for us all over the world.
All over the world.
And
What did that feel like for you?
to know that and to receive letters and emails it's one of the most encouraging things that you can have, to have a multitude of people praying for you.
Yeah.
You can feel it.
And we'd always share it with each other. Oh, we got a text message from so-and-so, they're praying for us today. Or we'd tell Dewey, you know, so-and-so's praying for you today. And it was really special. And it was a reminder that we are not alone.
Right.
You know, and that other people are invested in our family. And the church is made of believers. And we support each other. We help carry each other's burdens. And because Josh and I, we can't do it by ourselves. I mean,
No.
even just that one room where Dewey lived, just the medical support he required. I'm not even talking about all the humans who took care of him, all the respiratory therapists and the different specialists, the medical equipment that he needed. There's no way Josh and I, you know, we could not keep Dewey alive. But praise God, he put us in Nashville, Tennessee, at Vanderbilt Hospital with all these specialists, and they were able to keep him alive for, you know, almost 4.5 months. Yeah. And so, we were able to birth a child, and he was alive.
Yes.
Because that might not have even happened had the radiologist not seen what she saw on the ultrasound.
Yeah, and that for doctors and people to respond with knowing, you know, really having a midwife is, you know, not what needs to happen, that you need a C-section. There were so many things. And, you know, life is fleeting. So but still 4.5 months with your son, that he was with you on this side of heaven for 4.5 months is a gift. It's not what any of us are thinking when we have children, but yet I'm sure as you look back, it's like, thank you, Jesus, for every one of those days. And then some nurses talked to you after Dewey passed about another child. Tell us about that.
So Dewey he passed away in September, and then we learned about Brax, who was a baby in the same hospital Dewey was. Dewey was on the 4th floor.
In the NICU, yeah.
And then Brax was on the 5th floor in the PICU.
Were they in the hospital at the same time?
They were. They overlapped.
Oh,
Brax was already in the hospital when Dewey was born. And then we learned, so Brax had been living on the 5th floor all the while we were taking care of Dewey. And Brax's support system was the nurses and the doctors. His family had seen that his needs were too tough, and they had to, they couldn't provide for him. And so the hospital stepped in and they started.
I mean, who could blame them?
Right.
I mean, a child, because at the time, tell them about Braxton's medical needs at the time.
He had a big binder with all of his medicines that he needed.
The schedule, around the clock.
Around the clock schedule. He had a breathing machine. He had supplemental oxygen. He had a trach, just like Dewey did. His needs were many.
Yeah, and I think it's so kind of you, you know, to recognize that we can be so harsh with people, you know, about, well, how could you leave this child? But we don't know what they were facing and what they thought. We don't know anything about this family and that binder and the medical care and the expenses and the emotion. We don't know if they had other children. There are so many things, and yet we see the goodness of God in how he moved in Braxton's life by having a medical person come to you. You know, it's like the goodness of God is still there in the midst of all these huge problems that we have in life on a fallen world. And so, what did you think when they mentioned this child to you?
I'll let Katie take that one.
Okay, Katie.
So that it was a Thursday we found out about Braxton, and the previous day I had been praying, begging God for another child. I mean, I was very vulnerable. I won't go into all the details because it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, it's just, I was so sad, you know, and I was just begging for another child to hold because God gave us a
Even
mommy
though you
heart.
lost Dewey so soon, you were begging God for another child.
Well,
You
because
wanted
we
it.
were told, we were discouraged by the genetic counselors from having any more children biologically. And so we were also processing that along with all the, you know, the trauma of
I
our
can't
son's
imagine
life
what you
and
two
death.
were going through.
And so I didn't know how we were going to have more kids, but I knew that God wanted us to be parents. You know, He gave us Dewey for a reason.
Yes, he did.
And
Yes,
so
he did.
Wednesday I prayed, and you know, I mean, I prayed it off and on, but really Wednesday
Sure.
was a special time of prayer with God. Thursday we got a text message saying, hey, one of the nurses told me that y'all were interested in foster care. You know, can I put you in touch with a social worker? And so one nurse spoke to another nurse, spoke to a social worker who had been assigned to Braxton's case. And we talked to her that Friday. That next Monday, we were meeting Brax for the first time. And from that Monday on, he's been our son, you know, in our hearts. Legally, you know, it took longer than
Right,
that.
right.
But in our hearts, really, since we got the text message Thursday, that Thursday.
So, but okay. But you had lost Dewey to medical conditions and sorrow upon sorrow. So now another child is presented to you, but he's got a binder of medical problems. Did you feel afraid?
No.
No,
We were not
no fear.
afraid.
No fear.
They actually, we had a sit-down meeting with all of Braxton's specialists before we saw him for the first time, and they listed out all of his conditions. You know, this is probably what his life is going to be like. And we had all the same things with Dewey. And they said, you know, you'll have to have 24/7 nursing in your home. We had already prepared, I mean, God had already prepared our hearts for that with Dewey.
Yeah.
You know, you have to live within X number of miles of the hospital. Check. You have to have no children at the home. They didn't want him to have any contamination. We didn't have any kids. We had no pets. It was like our home was just perfect. Our family was perfectly curated for Braxton.
For Braxton. So you just said yes.
We did.
So they got all of his doctors together, all of his nurses, all of his care team, and the meeting lasted a long time because they had to list everything out, and they gave us like one final out, and they're like, if you want to say no, we're not going to judge you. We've laid out a big thing here.
Yeah.
And so if you want to say no, you can. And we were like, absolutely not. We're ready to go and meet him. So.
Yeah, we were jumping. Yeah, we were ready to go. But just to be fully honest, whenever we got in there and we saw him, he was really sick, and it was sad. It was so sad because it was like the only place where we'd ever been a mom and dad was at the hospital.
Yeah.
And we were getting to see people who knew us as Dewey's parents, and that was a really good feeling for us. Like, you see, we are a mom, we are a dad, even if our baby's not here. And when we met Braxton, it wasn't Dewey. You know, it might have all the same machines in the room, but for me, and I told Josh, I was open, like, I was really hoping it would be Dewey sitting there, you know, or laying there comatose because of all the medicines. And it was difficult also because we had missed the first 11 months of Braxton's life, and the nurses on the 5th floor didn't know us from Adam. You know, who are we? We're just these people who walked in not knowing that we do have some experience with medically fragile babies, but we didn't know Braxton like they did, you know. So there was some tension there at first until we could show, you know, we do have good hearts. We do want to love this child and bring him
Because
home.
obviously they had bonded with Braxton, and they are probably concerned for him. You know, one family's already not been able to complete that, and they, you know, I'm sure that they feel protective, but you guys were ready for the great big yes.
We were. Even if it seemed like everything was against us, because at that point, Monica, we weren't even his foster parents.
Right.
Because it doesn't start, the foster placement doesn't start until he's actually in our house, at our address. Who even knew when he was going to be discharged from the hospital? So we were committing, we didn't realize this at the time, but looking back, it's crazy how courageous God made us. We were committing to every day in the hospital indefinitely until this baby was sent home.
You all wanted,
And
to be parents.
We wanted to be
Yes.
parents, and we wanted Braxton.
You wanted
God
Braxton.
gave us Braxton. And he looked like me. Dewey didn't look like me. Dewey looked like Josh with the dark hair and dark eyes. I get a baby who looks like me. This is awesome. And so we were in the hospital with Brax until he was discharged, but that was 4 months.
4 months every day
November, December,
in the
January,
hospital.
February. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. We've got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue to talk to the Butlers, and we're also going to let you meet Braxton. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
You can purchase a copy of today's show for $15. Call us at 615-754-0039 or send a check to the address on the screen. Please mention the program number on the screen.
I'm glad that you could join us for Bridges today. Now is the moment we've all been waiting for, and that's to meet Braxton. Oh, so this is Braxton.
This is the child who was supposed to have zero functioning, the baby who is supposed to have a vegetable brain. I mean, just not be able to walk, not be able to move without machines.
I think what they meant is not to be able to stop squirming, right? Look at him.
He's a squirmy worm. I mean, he has exceeded all expectations.
Yes.
Brax, can you say hi?
Oh, and he said hi to everybody. Oh my gosh, so I'm sure they didn't think he'd be talking, and now he's talking and walking. Braxton, you are so handsome, and we are so happy to meet you.
Can you say thank you?
Say thank you.
So he learned to sign a lot too. How did that come about?
Oh man, that was a slow, hard road. We just kept signing to him and pulled his hands up to imitate it. And one day he just started signing, but it was probably a few months before we got any actual communication.
It started with mommy and daddy, much like, normal children.
Absolutely.
He wants to explore.
Yeah.
And it just grew from there. They told us that he might not be able to talk because he was hooked up to a ventilator and oxygen. And so they suggested that we start sign language. And
Did you all know sign language before this?
No, we knew some of the letters, but we didn't know, and we're still not really good at it. But
We're
we
not
know
super
enough
fluent. But then Braxton has his own language too. We've developed our own language with signs.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we'd be able to communicate with anyone in the deaf community.
But in your family,
in our
it's
family,
happening.
we know.
So all of this prayer and all of this love is just working miracles in Braxton, obviously.
Yeah.
He is a walking miracle. We fully believe that God is healing him, and that He's continuing to heal him.
Yeah, we actually just recently had one doctor's appointment, and they are so encouraged by the healing of his airway that they're talking about, we've actually already scheduled a date to take the trach out. So he will be without a trach. His G-tube, his feeding tube. Braxton, do you want to show him where your G-tube is? Where your G-tube was? Where's your G-tube? Right there.
Oh,
so his
see.
G-tube was taken out a few months ago because he can do everything by mouth now. Like he can eat, he can drink, he can take medicine, because that was a concern for the longest time. He had severe oral aversion, and he's been healed of that, and he loves food, let me tell you.
He loves food.
It's a great thing just to have a kid who can eat. What a blessing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So he's squirming, walking, eating,
Talking.
enjoying, talking.
Typical kid. I mean, for us,
I can see typical
he's so
kid.
Typical. He's so typical.
Oh,
of course,
and
he's
beautiful
still
smile.
pretty delayed with his fine and gross motor skills. But we get therapies every week. He has 3 different therapy sessions a week just to help him improve, to bridge the gap in that developmental delay.
Just amazing, just amazing. And in the middle of all of this, and I do want us to talk about American Ninja Warrior in a little bit, but it was your faith in your family, in addition to Braxton, like the family is growing.
Go ahead. Yeah, no.
God has given us 3 more children.
3 more
who
children.
we can adopt, and we will adopt them next week. We'll finalize that adoption. So just like Braxton, we fostered and then adopted. And these 3, Charlie, Jacob, and Catherine Grace, a sibling group, we've had them for 14 months in our family. And next week it'll be legal. And so we are so happy because there's been obstacle after obstacle with that. Braxton's being so silly. Silly Billy.
But I bet that this is something that you enjoy, because especially with hearing that he wouldn't be walking and talking, this is all like answered prayers and miracles every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. You go, baby. I was just going to say that we finalized the adoption for Braxton 1 year, almost to the date, but definitely after Dewey. Can you say Dewey? How do you say Dewey? Can you say Dewey with your tongue? Dewey always had his tongue out, so that's our sign for Dewey. After Dewey had gone to heaven. And so that is a special reminder for us. The month of September is special for our family. And now we're getting to adopt our oldest 3 in the month when Dewey was born. And so it's like these markers that show us that God remembers us and God is blessing us. And it's a special time of year this month and then September when we adopted Brax.
And you know, Katie, I think that's something that we can all do. You know, we all have markers in our life, you know, and different monuments, different things that are really huge. And I think if we can mark some of those things with happy, joyous things that God does, it reminds us of God's faithfulness. You know, we suffer, we have seasons of suffering, things that we think we can't make it through, but we have to remind ourselves of God's faithfulness. Things don't always go the way that we plan or pray, but God is still always faithful. His word says he'll never leave us, he'll never forsake us. And I look at you guys and I see the faithfulness of God. I see even your faithfulness to him, you know, through your suffering and different things, and that he's adding to your family. And now you're gonna have 4 children. Well, 5.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what we say. We have 4 kids in our home right now, because we always want to keep the door open for future kids.
I gotcha. Okay.
And then also we want to remember Dewey.
That's right.
But the 3 oldest, Jacob, especially our 8-year-old, he likes to tell people, don't forget about Dewey, you know, as if we were going to forget about Dewey. But he does remind people that we have another child in heaven.
Exactly. And that's something that is really, it's totally fine. You know, that's something for a lot of parents when a child goes to heaven that, you know, I've heard families say, or that I've met or interviewed here, well, we don't know what to say when someone says, well, how many children do you have? Oh, well, that's still your child. Heaven or here in our house with us, still our child.
And we tell our new kids that Dewey is their brother. Like, Dewey lived a life. He was our son, and he's Braxton's brother. He's Catherine Grace, Jacob, and Charlie's brother. And we tell them about little stories that happened to Dewey, and we talk about his life and
I mean, we
how
tell
God
them
has blessed us. Yeah.
that without Dewey, we never would have had the courage or the faith to have Braxton. And if we had, Braxton's the reason we became a foster family. We got our foster certification so that we could take care of him. And if we hadn't had Braxton, we wouldn't have these next 3. And without these next, you know, it's like it all builds.
Right.
So we're so grateful for that.
And if we can look at our lives like that. Now, Braxton's just climbing all over, and we want you to know that his nurse is here also. So he's not just like randomly all over the studio. We're taking good care of him, and maybe Braxton's taking good care of us today and exploring, which is awesome. So we do want to hear about American Ninja Warrior. That is how I first saw you, and I watched it. Do you mind
if I take Braxton to his nurse right now? And that way
Not at all. He can do that.
Warrior?
Yes, absolutely. Guys, this is just the cutest child ever. He's going to go be with his nurse.
He's pretending like he's never been on TV before.
Yeah. He's just adorable, and I'm so happy for you all. What made you decide to try out, or however that works with American Ninja Warrior?
So the tryout, the application process is big. There's a big application you got to fill online. You've got to make a video. But I mean, I remember sitting in my dorm room in college however long ago that was, and seeing it on TV.
Over 10 years ago.
And I remember seeing it on TV, and I was like, man, because they did it in Japan to begin with, and then they just import the show over here. I was like, if that ever came to America, I would love to do that. It looks so much fun. I think I'd be pretty good at it. I was pretty athletic. I played a lot of sports growing up, and then years pass, and they bring the show to America, and Katie's like, if you're really serious about it, why don't you just make a video, just try it out. And so the first year I did, and
I was tired of hearing him talk about it. Like, let's do it. I didn't know that he would be so successful.
Anyway, so I guess that was season 6 or 7. I didn't get a call back. And the next year I sent another video in, and I got one little call back from a producer, and it says, hey, could you change this on your application? We'll call you back. That never happened. And so the third year I tried out, I really opened up, and I shared about our story and how God was faithful to us, and how we lost Dewey and we found Braxton, and all throughout, I hope that people see that how God was working in our lives, and His goodness and His provision. And they said, this is a story that needs to be told. This is a story that people are going to connect with. It's God's story. It's what people are yearning for. Like, even if people don't know they need it, like,
absolutely,
they need it. They are wanting a story like this. And so they told us that they'd love to have us, and we drove 13 hours to Daytona Beach, Florida, with Brax. He's still hooked up to some of his machines, and we had to.
We had so many oxygen tanks with us. I think we were going scuba diving.
Yeah. And so Braxton got to see the beach for the first time. He got to go swimming for the first time. We made it a great little trip, and we were hesitant to get filmed on a show like that, because you never know what they're going to cut.
Right.
You never know if we say Jesus, or we say God, or if we say something like that they might cut it. And so we just tried. We bathed it in prayer. We talked about how we say things, how we talk, how we present ourselves, and the answers that we would give. So we're not like tricked into saying it was us when it wasn't.
That was what we did not want to happen.
It wasn't our strength. It was all God.
You all wanted to be able to focus on it was God that helped you do everything that you've done.
And we were thinking, how can we phrase things so even if they cut the parts about God, people still know that we're believers.
Yeah.
We really did put a lot of thought into it.
And we were really impressed with how well they showed our story.
Yeah, I don't know what you all said, but I watched the story, and I knew that you were believers in Christ. It was clear, so it seems like they did a really, really good job. We're completely out of time, but I want to thank you guys for coming today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks,
It's been so good to hear you, and so glad to hear how God keeps growing your faith and your family. We're out of time. We'll have all this info up on the website for you. We've got to go, but we say goodbye, and God bless you.
Log on to www.ctntv.org, where you can make a prayer request, view our program guide, see who's on bridges, or even watch one of Monica's latest teachings. Log on to www.ctntv.org.